There are things in the world so ancient that the word ancient no longer fits them. Ancient implies a beginning you can point to, a moment before which the thing did not exist, a first occasion, a point of origin that can be located in the long sequence of events and held up as the start of the account. Tom Bombadil does not have this. The oldest name given to him, in the oldest language spoken by the oldest people who ever walked in the world, is Arwain ben Adda, and it means, in the tongue of the elves who first put words to the things they found when they came into the world, eldest and fatherless, not merely old, eldest, the most ancient of anything still present. And fatherless, which means without origin, without the line of descent that every other creature can trace backwards through time to something before itself, a thing that simply was, without a prior thing from which it came. When the elves awoke at the waters of Withywindle, in the starlight, in the very first moment of their consciousness in the world, Tom Bombadil was already here. When men first came through the mountain passes into the wide lands of the West, following the paths no one had made for them, Tom Bombadil was already here. Before the kings of men built their towers, before the dwarves drove their first shafts into the rock, before the great forests were felled and the plains were broken for fields, and the rivers were given names, and the maps were drawn. Before all of this, which feels so old to those who live in its long shadow, Tom Bombadil walked in the world, and sang it, and knew it by a familiarity so complete that it was not knowledge anymore, but simply the texture of his existence. He remembers. And the word remember is too small for what he does, because remembering implies a gap between now and then, a distance crossed by recollection, and for Tom, there is no such gap. He carries within himself the direct, unmediated experience of the first raindrop, the first acorn, the morning when the world was wet with dew, and had not yet been touched by anything that wanted to possess it. These are not stories he tells or memories he visits. They are in him, continuous, as present as the yellow of his boots or the brightness of his eyes. He knew the dark under the stars, he has said, when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside, before Morgoth. Let that reach its full significance. Before the first and greatest of all darknesses entered the world and turned its nature from what it had been into what it has been ever since, Tom Bombadil was here. And the dark was not yet afraid of itself, and the night was simply night, deep and quiet and full of stars, and nothing in it hunted anything that did not also hunt for food. He walked in that world. He was in that world, in whatever way Tom Bombadil is ever in any world, fully, completely, without the distance that most beings maintain between themselves and their surroundings, the slight interior stepping back that comes from being a self that knows it is separate from the things around it. Tom has no such stepping back. He is present in his domain, the way water is present in a river, not merely passing through it, but constitutively part of it, inseparable from the specific character of the place, the reason the place is what it is. This is the first thing to understand about him. He is not in the world the way the other great beings of the world are in it. Gandalf is in the world as a mission, sent with a purpose, constrained by it, working toward it, Sauron is in the world as a will, reaching, grasping, extending toward the dominion that defines everything about him. Even the elves are in the world as visitors of a kind, beautiful and permanent, but always with one part of themselves turned toward a home that lies west and beyond. Tom Bombadil is in the world the way the world is in itself. He does not have a relationship with it. He is simply here, which is different from any relationship, and which produces a kind of peace in him that no war, no ring, no darkness, no ending that has occurred in all the long ages since the world began has been able to touch. His name among the hobbits who knew of him was Tom Bombadil, which is a hobbitish name, comfortable and a little bit funny, the kind of name that belongs to someone you could imagine sharing a pipe with. The dwarves called him Faun. The men of the north called him Orald, which is simply the oldest word those men had for old, used in isolation, as if the word exhausted itself on its subject and needed no further qualification. Each people who encountered him named him in the terms available to their own language, and none of the names quite covered him, and he did not seem particularly invested in any of them. He called himself Tom Bombadil when he spoke to the hobbits, and that was the name that stuck in the accounts that survived, and it suits him in the way that all the names suit him, partially, cheerfully, without quite containing what it is naming. His face was red, not the red of fever or exertion, but the red of a man who has spent every day of his life outdoors in all weathers and absorbed them all into his complexion, and emerged from the process with something that looked permanently weathered and permanently delighted by the weathering. His cheeks were round, his face was broad, and it was creased into 100 wrinkles that were not the wrinkles of age in the sense of decline, not the drawn-in lines of someone worn down, but the wrinkles of a face that has spent an incomprehensible amount of time in states of laughter and expression, a face so frequently in motion that the motion had settled permanently into the surface of it. His eyes were blue, the specific blue of a clear summer sky at noon, not the pale blue of early morning or the deep blue of late afternoon, but the blue that means maximum light, maximum warmth, maximum of whatever the sky expresses when it is at its most fully itself. They caught light differently from ordinary eyes, or seemed to. Brightness was in them rather than merely reflected by them, a self-sustaining quality that had nothing to do with whatever light happened to be available at the time. He wore a tall hat with a long blue feather in it. The hat was old, the kind of old that is past looking old and has arrived at simply looking right, the way anything worn long enough stops being a possession and becomes a part of the person who wears it. The feather was bright. His coat was bright blue, the blue of summer sky also, the same blue as his eyes, the blue of a world without clouds. His boots were yellow, emphatically yellow, unapologetically yellow, the yellow of a man who has no reservations about yellow boots and would find the question of reservations about yellow boots entirely baffling. He moved quickly. This surprised everyone who met him, because his roundness and his short-leggedness suggested something that would move at a comfortable amble, and the amble was always an option for him. But when Tom moved with purpose, he moved with the speed of water going downhill, natural, frictionless, covering ground faster than watching him seemed to account for. He walked with a skip and a bounce, a rhythm that was also music, a movement that was also dance, in the same way that his speech was also song, and his song was also something with more weight to it than song normally carries. He sang constantly, not performing, not communicating in the way that songs are usually used, not entertainment. Singing was simply how he was in the world, the form his presence took, the way some people hum when they are working, except that for Tom, the singing was not incidental to what he was doing. It was what he was doing. The songs were as much a part of his nature as his breathing, and they had, of those who heard them close enough and clearly enough, eventually understood, a quality that most songs do not have. They reached into things. They spoke to the nature of whatever was around them and addressed it directly, in a language that the things around them apparently understood and were moved by in ways that the things could not ignore. Old Man Willow heard his songs and obeyed them. The oldest, deepest, most malevolent tree in the old forest, a being of tremendous accumulated bitterness and strength, a will that had been hardening in the dark for ages beyond the counting of hobbits, a tree whose hatred of things that walked and moved and were not rooted extended into active and purposeful predation. Old Man Willow heard Tom's voice and let go of what he held, because Tom's voice did not ask and did not threaten and did not bargain. It simply named what was, and what was included the truth of Old Man Willow's nature, which ran deeper than his bitterness to something that had once been different. And the naming of that something older and cleaner reached through the bitterness and produced compliance in the tree's oldest levels. This is what Tom's power was, not force, not the imposition of a stronger will on a weaker one, something more like clarity. He sang the world to itself, told it what it was at the level deeper than its current condition, and the world responded to being told what it was, because the world had been that thing before it was anything else, and had not forgotten. He had a home. It sat in a valley through which the river Withywindle ran, a small and ancient river, brown and slow-moving in most of its reach, the most ancient river in a land full of ancient things, fed by springs that came from sources no map had ever charted. The valley it ran through was low and sheltered, and it had a quality of being set apart from the surrounding landscape that was not merely geographical, a warmth that persisted when the surrounding lands were cold, a light that lingered when the surrounding lands went dark, a sense of having arrived somewhere that did not share the same relationship to the ordinary world that the ordinary world maintained with itself. The house was part of the valley, not built on it, but grown from it, in the way of Tom's relationship to everything he inhabited. It was low, with a roof of green turf and walls of yellow clay, and it sat in a garden that grew in the specific combination of order and wildness that comes from tending so consistent and so intimate that the garden no longer needs much tending because it has internalized the intention of the tender. There were flowers everywhere, and the flowers were not seasonal. They bloomed in accordance with something other than the calendar, some private arrangement between themselves and the house they grew around. Inside, the rooms held whatever the rooms needed to hold at any given time. This is not magic in the flashy sense, not rooms that change on demand or spaces that are larger than they appear. more that the rooms reflected their inhabitants' relationship to provision, which was that enough was always there, because enough had always been there, and Tom had never experienced the kind of sustained insufficiency that teaches creatures to hoard. Goldberry was here. She was the river daughter, the daughter of the river woman, the spirit of the Withywindle itself, the living presence of the water given form and individuality and a face. She had golden hair that moved in a way not entirely explained by the air currents of the room, falling around her shoulders and continuing to move after she was still, a motion with its own source. Her gown was silver green, the colour of water at certain angles, of light through shallow water over a pale riverbed. She was beautiful in the way that things connected to water are beautiful, variably, in motion, different from every angle, the beauty consisting partly in the fact that it did not stay still long enough to be fully catalogued. Her voice was water, not in the metaphorical sense, in the direct, literal sense, that the sound of it was the sound of water, the particular music that rain makes against leaves, that a stream makes running over different sizes of stone, that a river makes from far away. She spoke, and the room had water in it. When the hobbits who found Tom's house asked Goldberry who Tom Bombadil was, needing to classify him, needing the category that would tell them how to relate to him, the drawer in their mental filing system marked ancient, powerful, mysterious being, where he should go, she did not provide a category. She gave them the best answer available, which was also the only accurate one. He is, she said. He is, as you are here. This was not deflection. It was precision. Tom Bombadil is present tense, simple form, no further qualification, in the way that very few things in the world can be said to simply be without further elaboration. Other things exist in relation to something, in relation to a purpose, in relation to a power above them, in relation to a conflict they are part of, or a role they serve, or a fear they carry about ceasing. Tom is in relation to nothing except the valley and the river and the morning and the song. He is the subject of his own existence without a predicate that pulls towards something else. His relationship with Goldberry was the one relationship in his account that appears to have the full weight of personal particularity, the specific quality of love between specific people, rather than the general warm engagement with everything that characterized Tom's interactions with the world at large. He brought her water-lilies. He spoke of her with a quality in his voice distinct from the quality his voice had when he spoke of anything else. Not more joyful, because Tom's voice was always joyful, but joyful in a different register, the specific joy of the thing you chose, rather than simply the thing that is. He had chosen Goldberry in whatever sense Tom Bombadil chooses things, and she had chosen him, and they had been together longer than most civilizations had been anything at all. She handled the autumn, when the great rains came and the rivers rose, and the valley was full of water and grey sky. Goldberry was at home in it, and made the house warm against it. And in this way the days of flood were not days to endure, but days with their own quality, their own specific satisfactions. Tom moved through rain as if rain were ordinary weather, which of course it was, which was his point about rain, which was his point about everything. It is what it is, and what it is enough. Now,
understand the old forest. The old forest was not merely old trees. It was what remained of the great forests that had covered Middle-earth in the First Age, not a remnant in the sense of a small preserved section of what had been larger, but a remnant in the sense of a piece of the original still alive and still carrying the memory of being the whole. The trees in the old forest were old enough to have roots that reached into the history of the world before the history of most of the peoples who lived around it began. They remembered, in whatever way trees remember, without language, without narrative, in the deep vegetative way of things that process time differently from creatures who move through it. The First Age, when the forests had been everywhere, and the clearings had been the anomaly rather than the rule. They did not like what had happened since. The elves had loved trees, and the trees had loved the elves, but even that love had not prevented the felling. The Númenóreans had built their great ships from Balerian timber, and the forests of the Western world had been cut in the Second Age at a rate that the forests could not match with growth. The men of the Third Age cleared land for farms and pasture and town. The forests shrank decade by decade, century by century, pushed back from every side, and the trees that remained carried the awareness of this shrinking in their grain, in the angle of their growth, in the way they leaned inward toward their paths, as if trying to close off the light that came through the canopy where the clearings opened.
Old Man Willow was the heart of this resentment.
He was enormous, a willow of impossible age and girth, rooted at a bend of the Withywindle, where the river slowed and the banks were deep in reed and soft ground. His roots went into the water and into the deep earth below the water and into whatever was below that, and he drew from those depths something that had turned dark in the long accumulation of years. He was not evil in the way that a person choosing evil is evil.
He was something older and less personal, the bitterness of a thing that had existed since before the concept of suffering, and had since learned it thoroughly, and had nowhere to put what it had learned, except in the pulling of things that walked into the grip of its roots, the swallowing of them into the deep wood, the slow and deliberate and thoroughly willow-paced subjugation of anything mobile and warm that came within his reach.
He was very strong, very old. The other trees of the old forest deferred to him, followed his will in the turning of paths and the closing of ways, and the general tendency of the forest to move things that entered it towards the river and towards him specifically. Even Bombadil's authority in the forest had limits at Old Man Willow's roots, not because Tom could not command the tree, but because the commanding required effort that most other things in the forest did not. When Tom's voice reached Old Man Willow, the tree let go.
This is not Tom overpowering Old Man Willow. It is Tom reminding Old Man Willow of what Old Man Willow is at a level deeper than the bitterness. Trees predate their own resentments. Below the rage of the losing forest, below the centuries of being diminished, there is still the willow nature, the reaching for water, the specific relationship to the river's light, the bare biological purpose of a willow tree that has nothing to do with malice. Tom's songs speak to this. They go around the anger to the thing beneath it. Old Man Willow cannot ignore this, because what Tom names is more fundamentally true of Old Man Willow than what Old Man Willow has made of himself.
He opened,
He opened because there was something in him that could not keep itself closed when Tom was singing. And what poured out of him when he opened was not surrender, but the relief of being reminded, even briefly, of his own actual nature. Beyond the forest, east, where the trees gave way to the long open slopes running toward the great road, the Barrow-downs waited.
They stretched for miles, rolling, treeless, the ancient burial grounds of a people who had been great once and were now only present as the shape of their graves. The mounds rose from the grassland in long, irregular rows, some of them enormous, some of them smaller, all of them built in the fashion of peoples who believed that the dead should be enclosed in something that matched the weight of what they had been in life. They were old, older than the men of Gondor, older than the wars of the Third Age, from an era when the world above the line of the rivers had been inhabited by a civilization whose records did not survive in any form that could be straightforwardly read.
And into those mounds, at some point in the long, dark history of the northern kingdoms, the Witch King of Angmar had sent his shadows. The Barrow-wights were not the dead men who lay in the graves. They were something that had come into the graves from outside, spirits of darkness, servants of the Witch King's will, sent to inhabit the burial chambers and the bones within them, and to use the weight of the ancient dead as a kind of armor. They were cold, and they were purposeful, and they had a specific hatred for warm and living things that was not natural hatred, but manufactured, imported, the hatred of something that had been filled with someone else's malice and sent to express it at a distance from the one who felt it.
They were capable of tremendous harm. Their cold, when they wrapped it around you, was not temperature. It was a different thing. The cold of something that wanted the warmth out of you, specifically wanted the particular quality of being alive that keeps you from being a useful corpse, and was working efficiently toward removing it. The hobbits, caught by the Barrow-wight, lay in the mound in a state that was not sleep and not death, but something between them, drifting toward the latter, adorned with white robes and ancient jewelry, and the specific sense of a future disappearing. Tom came.
He came because Frodo called him. Frodo, lying in the dark of the mound, with the cold pressing inward, and his companions already too far under to call out, reached for the one name he had been given for exactly this kind of mead, and spoke it. Tom Bombadil. He said it 3 times, with the full force of his need behind it, and from outside the mound, at a distance that seemed impossible for sound to cover in the time it covered it, Tom's voice came back to him.
Not the voice of someone hurrying to help, not the voice of someone gathering their power for a confrontation, the voice of someone walking across the downs in the morning, singing, as if the morning and the downs and the singing were the complete substance of what was happening, and the Barrow-wight inside the mound was an inconvenience to be noted and resolved, rather than a significant darkness to be reckoned with. Tom arrived at the mound's entrance, and he sang.
He sang the dark to nothing. He sang the cold out of the stones. He sang the wight's presence in the mound into the open air, and then across the grassland and away into the hills, with a directness and a completeness that left the mound simply a mound, old stones and old bones, and the memory of a people who had deserved better than to have their resting place occupied by someone else's malice. The Wight fled because Tom's voice left it nowhere to stand. Not frightened away, exactly. There is nothing in Tom's voice that frightens, nothing designed to make the dark thing afraid.
Just nowhere to stand, because the truth Tom was singing was more absolutely true than the darkness the Wight had brought into the stones. And truth sung by Tom Bombadil is not something that shadows share space with.
He gathered the hobbits from the mound with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone accustomed to gathering hobbits from barrows, which, in a certain sense, he was. He called their names. He brought them back to themselves with the particular warmth of a presence that is entirely and unself-consciously warm, that makes no drama of the warmth, and therefore produces it more thoroughly than any dramatic warmth could manage. He made them sit in the sun and look at their hands and feet and remember what they were, and the remembering came back quickly because Tom's presence made the world seem very real and very ordinary and very safe, which, after the mound, was exactly what was needed. He gave them gifts from the mound's treasures, not the gold and gems. Tom had no interest in gold and gems, and watching him handle treasure was like watching water handle treasure, the complete absence of the acquisitive impulse producing a relationship with valuable things that was purely aesthetic and almost immediately concluded. He gave them blades, old blades, Númenórean made, forged in the wars against Angmar, blades that carried in their making the specific enmity of the people who made them toward the Witch King's servants. He gave these to the hobbits with the ease of someone giving away useful things they have no use for, not noticing the significance in the giving, which was the significance that mattered most. He sent them on their way, with advice about the road and ponies he had found on the downs, and a cheerfulness so genuine and so uncomplicated that the transition from the mound's dark to this was almost vertiginous. The distance between nearly becoming a Barrow Wight's victim and being sent off by a merry round man in blue and yellow with your travel arrangements made for you was very large, and Tom managed it without appearing to notice that it was large. This was always his quality. The gap between the darkness and Tom was so wide that the darkness in his vicinity simply did not have the same weight it had everywhere else. Not because he destroyed it, or because he was immune to it. He is not immune in the sense of being protected against something that threatens him. He is immune in the way that a mountain is immune to a rainstorm, not because the rain cannot hit it, but because the rain hits something so much larger than itself that hit is not really the right word. Now sit with the question that the Council of Elrond sat with in the year of the ring's journey to the fire. Elrond gathered the representatives of the free peoples to decide what was to be done with the One Ring. Every option was considered. Destroy it, send it to the sea, send it to the Valar in the west, all considered, and each found wanting. And someone asked, what about Tom Bombadil? The thinking was sensible. The ring had no power over Tom. It did not make him invisible when he put it on. It did not reach into him and find the desire that it could use against him, because there was no such desire to find. He was outside the ring's logic entirely. He was not tempted because he did not want what the ring offered. If anyone could hold the ring safely, carry it without being changed by it, could the ring not be trusted to Tom? Gandalf answered. He said, Tom Bombadil is the master,
But he does not call himself master of anything. He is his own master. If the ring were given to him, he would not keep it. He does not care for such things. He might lose it, or give it away, or laugh at it and throw it in the river without a second thought, and then the ring would go where it should not go. And then Gandalf said the other thing. He said, "If all else is conquered, Bombadil will fall last, and then night will come."
This requires the same dwelling on as Tom's original description required, because it reframes everything about what Tom is. He stands entirely outside the ring's power. He is older than everything. He is joyful and free and entirely content. And if the darkness wins, if Sauron takes the ring and the world is unmade, Tom Bombadil will be the last thing the darkness reaches.
Not because he will fight. There is no account, no suggestion, no implication in any source that Tom Bombadil will fight the darkness when the darkness comes for everything. He will not lead armies. He will not raise a power to contest the ring's mastery. He will simply be here, as he has always been here, singing in his valley, walking his domain, doing exactly what he does, until the wave that takes everything takes him too.
This is where the sadness lives in Tom's story. Not in corruption, not in fall, not in the specific tragic arc of greatness destroyed by its own nature. The sadness in Tom is the sadness of a thing so ancient and so outside the struggle that it cannot change the struggle's outcome, but will share it anyway. He knew the world before it had shadows. He will know the world when it has nothing but shadow, if it comes to that. And what he will know in that moment will be the same thing he has always known, only ending.
He does not know this as a tragedy. He knows it as a fact about his situation, the way he knows facts about everything, directly, without the buffering distance of self-concern, without the anxiety about the future that affects all beings capable of losing something they love. If Tom grieves the world's potential ending, the grief has not changed anything about how he spends his days, which are spent in the valley, with Goldberry, walking the old forest, singing to the Withywindle, collecting water-lilies, and being, with complete commitment, himself. He is the only being in the world for whom the ring was nothing. Think about what the ring was. Think about what it did to everyone else who encountered it, the immediate, specific, personal way it found the particular desire in each person and fed it, the way it worked differently on every person, but worked on every person, finding the crack in each life that it could widen. It found Frodo's compassion and used it. It found Boromir's love of his people and used that. It found Faunum's loneliness and used it for 500 years. It found Bilbo's love of discovery and made him possessive. The ring was a perfect instrument of exploitation because it began with what was real in you and made it wrong. Tom had nothing for it to find. Not because he was lacking something, not because he was less rich in desire or less complicated in his inner life, but because what Tom wanted, the ring could not offer. Tom wanted the valley and the river and the morning and the song and Goldberry. He wanted the specific, local, entirely adequate things that were already his, that had always been his, that no ring had any power to give him because he had them.
There was no gap in him for the ring to pour itself into. He was full.
This is the thing about Tom Bombadil that the wisest and most learned of the world found most difficult to fully explain. Not his age, not his immunity, not his power over the forest. What they could not quite explain was his contentment, where it came from, how it had survived everything the ages had put him through, the darkness of the first age, the wars of the second, the long wait of the third, without becoming something other than itself. How a thing could be so completely satisfied with what it had when everything around it was striving for more.
Gandalf, who understood more of the world than almost any other living being, said only that Tom was his own master. He did not explain this further, which suggests either that no further explanation was available, or that the explanation was the kind that cannot be made in words, the kind where pointing is the best you can do, and even pointing falls short.
Tom himself, when asked who he was, gave the same quality of answer that Goldberry gave. He did not explain himself, he described himself, and the description was a song, and the song was about the valley and the river and the morning, and how long he had been walking in them, and the description did not add up to an identity in the way that identity is usually constructed, out of history and purpose and relationship to power and role in the scheme of things. It added up to a presence, a being here. And this is what I am, expressed not as a claim, but as a simple statement of fact, offered with the same ease with which he offered everything else.
He was here before the world learned to be afraid. He will be here, the wise say, until the end, last as he was first. Between those 2 points, before the fear and after everything, he has spent an amount of time so vast that trying to express it in years produces a number that the mind rejects as meaningless. He has spent it singing, walking the valley, listening to the river, watching the seasons turn in the specific, intimate, unhurried way that only someone with unlimited time and no anxiety about its passage can watch anything, collecting water-lilies for Goldberry, naming the things he found, as if naming were its own sufficient reason for being, as if a world named with love were better than a world unnamed, even if nothing else changed. He has watched the great things rise and fall from whatever remove his contentment provides. The kingdoms of the elves in the first age, burning, the drowning of Numenor, the wars of the second age, the long decline of the third, the slow loss of the elvish presence as the grey ships went west, and the harbours of the west were emptied of their light. All of it, observed from a valley in the angle between the forest and the downs, where a round man in blue and yellow walked with a skip and a bounce, and sang to the trees and the river and the sky. He did not save any of it. He could not have. His power, which was real and which in his own domain was absolute, was local in a way that was non-negotiable. It ended at the borders of his territory with the clean finality of something that was never designed for extension. The world beyond his valley was the world's problem, and the world had powers designed for addressing world problems, and Tom was not one of them, and had never claimed to be. What he was something else, the evidence that the world contained things outside the ring's reach.
things outside the struggle for power, outside the corruption, outside the whole long argument between dominion and freedom that had been the world's primary business since Morgoth first lifted his voice in discord. The ring could not touch Tom Bombadil, because Tom Bombadil existed in a category the ring had no means of addressing, a mode of being that had never been in range of what the ring was made to control.
This was, in its way, important, not to the conduct of the War of the Ring. Tom played no part in it, and the accounts make no suggestion that he was aware of it in any detail or concerned with its outcome beyond the general awareness of a very old being that things in the world were in a state of crisis, but important in the way that exceptions to rules are important. The ring was made to rule everything. There was something it could not rule. In a world otherwise defined by the extent of Sauron's reach, this was a fact worth knowing, even if the fact was local, even if it didn't change the outcome of the war, even if the only thing you could do with the knowledge was say, "Here is a place the shadow does not govern.
Here is one valley, one river, one round man in yellow boots that the darkness never reached." There is comfort in that, though Tom would not have called it comfort, because Tom would not have framed his existence as a response to the darkness. He existed before the darkness and would exist after it, and the darkness was not the reference point for his presence in the world. He simply was what he was, and what he was happened to be outside the darkness's reach, and this was a consequence of what he was, rather than a feature of it.
He sang to Goldberry in the evenings when the light came slant through the valley and the river caught it and broke it into pieces on the water. He walked the forest paths in the early morning when the dew was heavy and the air was cold and clean, and the trees were doing what trees do in early morning, the specific, unhurried, vegetative business of being trees. He spoke to the stems on the downs, and the stones were old enough to have things to say, and Tom was old enough to hear them.
He was here before the first acorn. He carried in whatever he was instead of a body, in whatever a being of his nature carries instead of a body, in the Maia substance or the older than Maia substance, or whatever the truth of his nature is, which the sources leave open, and which is perhaps not the question that matters, the full, unbroken experience of every morning this world had ever had, not as memory, as presence, as the continuous is, the always now, the permanent current moment that is the specific gift and the specific nature of something that does not experience time as a direction it is moving in.
He knows your morning as well as his own. He knew it before you were born to have it. He will know mornings after you are gone, as he has known mornings after the going of everything else. Last, as he was first. The accounts of those who met him agree on very little, except the song and the yellow boots, and the eyes like summer sky, and the feeling present in his company of something that was not safety exactly, but was adjacent to safety, the feeling of a world that contained, in at least one valley along one river, beside one ancient forest, something that had not been touched by the long weight of what the ages had done, something that was still itself, something that, in the middle of the war and the darkness and the ring going south,
and the hope going thin, and the world feeling very much as if it was coming to the end of something that was still completely, unhesitatingly, undefendably all right.
Tom Bombadil in his house with Goldberry, the water-lilies in a wide bowl, the fire lit, the rain on the roof, the river singing in the night below the valley, the old songs going up into the rafters and coming back down changed into something that was still the same song. He was never threatened by the darkness. He never fought it. He never claimed any authority over it or any power that ran counter to it. He simply was, in a valley in the corner of the world, being himself, with a thoroughness and a wholeness and a joy so complete that the darkness had no angle of approach. This is not a strategy. It is not a philosophy. It is not a lesson exactly, though the wise who considered it found lessons in it.
It is just Tom Bombadil, the oldest thing in the world, still walking, still singing, in the yellow boots that he was wearing before the mountains were built, and will be wearing if the mountains fall, carrying in every step the direct, unmediated, entirely adequate experience of the world as it is, as it has always been, as it will be, underneath the history and beyond the wars, and before the darkness and after the ending. He is. He is as you are here. Somewhere between the old forest and the Barrow-downs, in a valley where the Withywindle runs, a light is on in the house in the evening. The rain is on the roof. A voice is singing, old syllables, deep and merry, the kind of song that the rain appears to listen to.
Goldberry has set the water-lilies in the bowl, and the bowl on the table, and the table is ready, and the house is warm. Outside, the old forest is doing what the old forest does. The Barrow-downs are quiet, the grass on the mounds moving in the wind from the east. The ancient road runs through the dark, and the dark is full of ordinary things, the sounds of a night that knows how to be itself without being told. And Tom is still here, oldest and fatherless, walking the world that was his before it had a name, that will be his after it has used up all the names it knows. He does not need you to understand him. He was here before you arrived to understand anything. He will be here.